In the heart of the desert, where the winds sang through sand like a whisper from eternity, a child was born beneath the golden gaze of the gods. The sun, Ra himself, burned brighter that morning, casting a river of light down the Nile, as if to announce that Egypt had gained a son destined for legend. The priests spoke in hushed awe, for they believed the heavens did not shine so fiercely without purpose. And so began the life of Tutankhamun, the boy who would become the most famous pharaoh in history, not for his conquests or wisdom, but for the way time itself refused to forget him. He was born into a world already trembling. The gods of Egypt were angry, or so it was whispered in the sacred halls. The reign of Akhenaten, Tutankhamun's father, had shaken the foundations of the empire. Akhenaten had defied centuries of belief, turning Egypt's worship from its pantheon of gods to one single deity, the Aten, the blazing disk of the sun. The temples of Amun were abandoned, priests stripped of power, and old ways cast into the dust. The empire that once felt eternal now stood fractured, divided between the old faith and the new. Tutankhamun was born into this chaos, a prince in a palace of marble and silence. His mother, likely the gentle but mysterious Kia, would not live to see her son crowned. Some said she had angered the gods by supporting Akhenaten's heresy. Others claimed poison or the slow curse of disease. Her absence left the boy under the care of wet nurses and tutors who spoke more to each other than to their fragile charge. The boy grew beneath ceilings painted with stars and floors polished like mirrors. The palace at Amarna was a marvel of light. No dark corners, only long corridors open to the sun, where Akhenaten's servants prayed to Aten's rays. But the young Tutankhamun, even as a child, would stare not at the blazing sky, but at the shadows it left behind. He was quiet, observant, a listener rather than a speaker. When Akhenaten died, Egypt exhaled in both sorrow and relief. The experiment of one god had failed. The priests of Amun whispered their return, and somewhere in the corridors of the royal palace a group of men gathered, generals, scribes, and high priests. They needed a new pharaoh, someone the people could love, someone the gods could forgive.
The boy was 9. Tutankhaten, the living image of Aten, was his name then, a name that bound him to his father's forbidden faith. But the council decided that would not do. The old gods must be appeased, the temples reopened, the people calmed. So they changed his name to Tutankhamun, the living image of Amun. With that one act, a new age began, and a child sat upon a throne older than memory. He could barely see over the armrests, but tradition demanded he wear the double crown of Egypt, the red of the north and the white of the south, symbols of a land united. The crown was heavy, but heavier still were the expectations laid upon him. I, the vizier, stood behind him like a shadow carved from loyalty, while Horemheb, commander of the army, watched from the side, a man of ambition and iron. The boy's every word was measured, every gesture guided. Egypt had its king, but its king was a puppet. Yet even a puppet can dream. Tutankhamun dreamed of the gods. He dreamed of Amun's temple restored, of Thebes rising again with gold and song. In the gardens of the palace, he would listen to the rustle of papyrus and imagine the voices of the divine whispering through the reeds. When he spoke of rebuilding shrines and returning statues to their sanctuaries, the priests smiled, not realizing the boy meant it Beneath the golden youth's delicate face burned a spirit of quiet defiance. The first act of his reign was restoration. He decreed the reopening of Amun's temples, the return of lands taken by Akhenaten, and the reinstatement of the priesthood. Offerings once again filled the altars, and Egypt, after years of silence, heard prayers rise into the heavens once more. The people rejoiced, and the name of the young king was praised in every marketplace and field. "Pharaoh is favored by the gods again," they said. Tutankhamun began to grow, and with him so did his resolve. He married Ankhesenamun, his half-sister, daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Together, they became symbols of rebirth, young, beautiful, and divine. Paintings from the time show them sitting side by side, touching gently, her hand resting on his arm as sunlight poured over them. They were Egypt's hope made flesh.
But behind the murals, the air was thick with intrigue. Still whispered in the shadows, guiding the boy king's hand. Horemheb trained the armies and dreamed of power. The priests plotted, the courtiers schemed, and always the ghosts of Amarna, Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and the forbidden god Aten lingered in whispers and memories. The boy king's health, however, began to falter. Tutankhamun's body was delicate, perhaps cursed by generations of royal intermarriage. His foot twisted inward, his spine curved, his steps painful. When he rode his chariot, attendants were close, ready to catch him should he stumble. But pain did not silence him. He still held counsel, still gave orders, still dreamed of leading Egypt into glory. In the second decade of his reign, the kingdom flourished. Trade flowed again from Nubia and the Levant. Gold from Kush gleamed in the temples. Artists carved statues of the boy king, offering to the gods, his youthful face serene, almost divine. The priests called him "He who restores the world." But whispers of war and rebellion came with the northern winds, enemies who saw Egypt weakened by years of chaos. Tutankhamun prepared for battle. He donned armor of gold and leather, his young face hard with determination. In murals, he is shown driving his chariot, bow drawn, striking down his foes. Whether he truly fought or not, none can say, but the image mattered. The world saw a king reborn, Egypt's son standing tall once more. And then, one night, the torches of the palace burned low. The desert wind howled like a lament. Tutankhamun fell ill, a fever that came like the vengeance of forgotten gods. He was carried to his bed, priests summoned to chant the rites, doctors bringing poultices and prayers. Ankhesenamun wept beside him, her tears mixing with oil of lotus. The fever raged. For days he drifted between dreams and death, visions of the gods swirling before him. Amun, Ra, Osiris, even Aten, his father's god, reaching out with blinding light. "Do not forget me," the sun seemed to whisper. "All kings fall, but some are remembered."
When the dawn came, Egypt's palace fell silent. The boy who had restored the gods was gone. Tutankhamun, last light of a broken dynasty, had died at 19. The land mourned. Priests wove his name into hymns. Artisans carved his tomb deep in the Valley of the Kings, filling it with treasures to guide him into the afterlife. Golden chariots, jeweled daggers, the mask that would one day make him immortal.
His wife, Tutankhamun, vanished from history soon after, her fate as mysterious as the desert itself. I, his old vizier, took the throne, wearing the boy's crown for himself. For 3,000 years, sand and silence covered his name. Pharaohs came and went, kingdoms rose and fell. But in 1922, in the Valley of the Kings, a hand brushed against stone and a doorway was revealed. Howard Carter lit his candle, and the world gasped at what time had hidden. Gold gleaming like sunrise, the boy's face serene beneath his mask, untouched by millennia. Tutankhamun, the forgotten king, had returned. His tomb whispered of splendor and fragility, a life too brief, a reign too bright. He had ruled only a decade, yet his death gave him eternity. The mask, the treasures, the curse, all became part of his legend. And across the centuries, from deserts to museums, his gaze still meets ours, calm, regal, eternal. He was the boy who became a god, the forgotten Pharaoh who conquered time itself. He was Tutankhamun, Egypt's boy who became a legend. The shadow of the sun god. The sands of Amarna still shimmered with the heat of Aten's gaze. Long after Akhenaten's death, his city of light stood half buried in silence. Temples open to the sun, walls painted with the faces of a god without form. The great experiment had ended, yet its ghost lingered, and it would haunt the boy Tutankhamun long before he ever understood what his father had done.
As the priests prepared the funeral rites of Akhenaten, the wind carried whispers, "The heretic king is dead." The priests of Amun, once banished, began to step from the shadows. Their gods had been forgotten for nearly 2 decades, but Egypt was a land that remembered. Every stone, every temple, every hymn still carried their names. The people, weary of a single god that burned too bright, were ready to return to the comforting multitude of their old faith. And into that moment of uncertainty, the boy Tutankhaten, the living image of Aten, became their reluctant hope. He was taken from Amarna, from the open courtyards of his father's sun city, and brought to Thebes, where the air was thick with incense and tradition. There, among colossal statues and whispering priests, the child king was crowned. His small hands held the crook and flail, symbols of divine rule. Gold and lapis glimmered on his brow, and the priests chanted the ancient words that had crowned pharaohs for 1,000 years. The gods had returned. Egypt had a ruler once more, though he was barely old enough to understand the power that now rested on his fragile shoulders. It was I, the aged vizier, who guided his hand. He was a man of quiet cunning, one who had served both Akhenaten and his son. He whispered lessons of diplomacy, of patience, of how power was not seized in Egypt. It was worn like a mask. At his side stood Horemheb, commander of the armies, a warrior of common birth who had risen through skill and iron will. Between them, they formed the true spine of Egypt's rule, while the boy king was the face that soothed a weary nation. Tutankhamun did not resist. He listened, observed, and learned. The palace was his world, its echoing halls lined with hieroglyphs of kings who had come before him. He would walk those corridors, tracing the carved names with his fingers, wondering what it meant to be eternal. At night, under the flicker of oil lamps, his tutors read him the stories of Horus and Osiris, tales of death and resurrection, of a godchild who avenged his father and restored balance to the world. The boy would listen in silence, his eyes distant, perhaps already feeling the weight of those myths upon his own young shoulders. As he grew, so did his awareness of the tension that lingered like dust in every corner of the palace. The priests of Amun rejoiced at his renaming. Tutankhamun, the living image of Amun, a name that erased his father's god from memory. But the loyalists of Aten, those few who still clung to the vision of a single sun deity, mourned in secret. The country was healing, yes, but the scar was deep.
Tutankhamun was 10 when he first entered the great temple of Amun at Karnak. He was carried on a golden litter beneath canopies of blue silk as priests and nobles bowed along the processional way. The temple was alive with music, flutes, harps, and the rhythmic chant of hundreds of voices echoing through the hypostyle hall. For the first time, the boy saw the god who had reclaimed his land. The statue of Amun, veiled in gold and mystery, was lifted before him. And in that moment, under the shimmering incense smoke, he felt something. Awe, perhaps, fear, or the faint stirring of destiny. He placed an offering of gold before the god and whispered the words the priests had taught him. "May Amun guide my hand and bless the two lands." The crowd cheered. The people wept. Egypt had her king and her gods once more. In the years that followed, Tutankhamun began to shape his reign, though still through the hands of others. Decrees were issued in his name to restore the temples desecrated during his father's rule. Statues of Amun, Mut, and Khonsu were brought out of storage, repaired, repainted, and paraded through Thebes in processions that dazzled the crowds. The priests rejoiced, and in their gratitude they blessed the boy king as the restorer of Maat, the divine balance of the world. But not all were pleased. In the distant corners of Egypt, the cities built for Aten were abandoned, their walls crumbling under the desert sun. Yet the memory of Akhenaten's vision lingered like a curse. Horemheb's soldiers reported unrest, small uprisings in the delta, whispers of rebellion among the soldiers who had once worshipped the Aten. Egypt was healing, but it was not yet whole. And amidst it all, Tutankhamun grew, from a boy into a youth. He was said to be delicate, his limbs thin, his body frail. He walked with a cane, though he hid it well during ceremonies. Still, those who knew him closely spoke of his keen mind, his kindness, and his love of beauty. He adored music, the scent of lotus flowers, the shimmer of the Nile at sunset. The gods had made him fragile, perhaps, but they had also given him a soul that saw wonder in everything. At 12, he was married to Ankhesenamun, his half-sister, the daughter of Nefertiti and the last living thread of the old royal line. She was older, wise beyond her years, and fiercely protective of him. Together, they were like the rising sun and moon, young, radiant, tragic in their destiny. Paintings show them together, tenderly holding hands, eyes meeting with quiet affection. It was said that when Ankhesenamun laughed, Tutankhamun forgot his pain. But beyond the walls of their private chambers, the court seethed with ambition. Ai's counsel grew colder, more possessive. Horemheb's voice, always sharp with pride, began to question why a boy should command men who had shed blood for decades. The priests demanded more offerings, the generals demanded more wars, and the boy king, caught between them all, sought only peace.
He began to dream of rebuilding Egypt's power, not through war, but through faith and art. He commissioned artisans to carve new statues, frescoes, and jewelry, symbols of rebirth after darkness. Temples rose again in Thebes and Memphis, each bearing his cartouche. The people, who had known famine and division, began to hope once more. Yet fate, as it always does with those chosen too early, was waiting. Tutankhamun began to suffer strange pains in his leg, sharp and sudden. His physicians applied poultices and ointments made from honey and herbs, but the pain worsened. At times he could not stand without aid.
Ankhesenamun stayed beside him, holding his hand as he winced through the nights. She would whisper the hymns to Isis, goddess of healing, her voice trembling with fear that the gods might not be listening. Outside their chamber, the empire moved on. Horemheb expanded the army's reach. Ai tightened his hold over the court, and the boy who had been made a god by title began to feel the limits of his mortal flesh. Still, he refused to surrender. When envoys from the north arrived with demands and threats, Tutankhamun ordered his generals to ready the chariots. He would not have Egypt appear weak.
Tutankhamun, though weak, understood more than they thought. His eyes, dull with fever, still glimmered with awareness when I knelt before him with false concern. "Egypt must endure, my king," the viziers said softly. "You have restored the gods. You have brought peace. Let us preserve it." "Egypt," Tutankhamun whispered, voice thin as papyrus, "Egypt belongs to the gods, not to men." Those would be among his last words to I. The fever deepened. His attendants found him slipping in and out of dreams, speaking to those who were long dead, his father Akhenaten, his mother Kia, his ancestors stretching back to the first kings. In his visions he walked among temples bathed in sunlight, where gods spoke in voices of thunder and rivers gleamed with gold. He saw a moon and Aten standing side by side, their light merging into one. "There are not many gods or one," the vision whispered, "only eternity wearing many faces." On the 30th night of his illness, the palace grew silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Ankhesenamun sat beside him, her hands trembling, her heart breaking. "Stay with me," she whispered. "The gods will not take you. You are their image. You are Egypt." Tutankhamun opened his eyes, eyes that once had reflected the sunrise over Thebes, and looked at her with the faintest smile. "Then Egypt," he murmured, "must live without me." The dawn came, and with it the end of the boy who had brought back the gods. The priests covered his body in linen, anointed him with sacred oils, and chanted the prayers that would guide him through the underworld. For days the palace wept. The people filled the streets wailing for their young Pharaoh. The sound of mourning echoed across the Nile, through the fields, into the mountains. They had lost not just a king, but a symbol of hope. Ankhesenamun was left alone in a world that had been built for him. She was queen, yet powerless, surrounded by men who saw her only as a means to the throne. I moved swiftly. He declared that the divine order demanded a new ruler to maintain Ma'at, the balance of the world. And so, under the watch of the priests, he took the crown for himself. Some say he forced Ankhesenamun to marry him. Others believe she fled into the desert and was never seen again.
Tutankhamun was carried to the Valley of the Kings. The path wound through the cliffs of Thebes, where the golden sun blazed upon the rocks like the gaze of Ra himself. The burial was small, hurried, almost secret. The empire was unstable, and Oy's reign depended on swift silence. The tomb that received the boy king was meant for another, small, cramped, unfinished. Yet it would become the most famous resting place in the history of humankind. The artisans worked through the night. They painted the walls with scenes from the Book of the Dead, the journey of the soul through darkness, the weighing of the heart, the gates of eternity. They placed beside him chariots, statues, food and wine, gifts for the afterlife. The greatest treasure was his funerary mask, crafted from solid gold and inlaid with lapis and carnelian. The face was serene, ageless, divine. Beneath it, however, lay the fragile bones of a boy who had never lived to become a man. When the last torch was extinguished, the tomb was sealed. The stone door was plastered and marked with the royal seal, and then silence claimed it, a silence that would last for more than 3,000 years. I reigned briefly. Horemheb rose after him, restoring order and erasing the names of both Akhenaten and Tutankhamun from the monuments, condemning them to oblivion. The city of Amarna was abandoned. The boy king's memory faded into dust. His name disappeared from the king lists. To the world, he had never existed. But eternity, as the Egyptians knew, cannot be denied. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. The Nile flowed steady as time itself. Beneath the desert's golden skin, Tutankhamun slept, untouched, unspoiled, waiting. Then, in the year 1922, a foreign archaeologist knelt before a sealed doorway in the Valley of the Kings. His name was Howard Carter. He brushed away the sand, revealing the cartouche of a forgotten pharaoh, Nebkepurure Tutankhamun. With trembling hands, he made a small hole, inserted a candle, and looked inside. A reporter asked, "Can you see anything?" Carter whispered, "Yes, wonderful things." Gold glimmered in the dark, untouched since the dawn of history. The walls shone with the color of immortality. The boy king had returned, his face gazing from beneath the mask that had outlived empires. Tutankhamun's tomb became a bridge between ages, between gods and men, between the living and the dead. The treasures spoke not only of wealth, but of longing, of humanity's eternal desire to be remembered. And so the forgotten boy who had ruled for barely a decade became immortal.
His name, once erased, was now spoken in every language. His face, once hidden, became the emblem of ancient Egypt itself. The child who restored the gods had become a god of memory, proof that death cannot silence a story that time was meant to tell. In the end, perhaps that was Tutankhamun's true legacy. Not conquest, not power, but remembrance. For in his short life, he restored what his father had broken, not only the faith of Egypt, but the fragile thread between humanity and the divine. And even now, when the desert wind sweeps through the Valley of the Kings, it is said you can hear the faint echo of a boy's laughter, the laughter of a child who defied oblivion and became eternal. Tutankhamun, the boy who became a legend. The tomb of eternity. The Valley of the Kings lay still beneath the desert sun, a vast sea of stone and silence. The cliffs loomed like ancient sentinels, their faces carved by the wind and the centuries. Beneath them, the tombs of Egypt's mightiest lay hidden, the resting places of gods made men, sealed for eternity. For thousands of years, their doors had remained closed,
their names whispered only by the wind. But, in the winter of 1922, a single man refused to let the silence rest. His name was Howard Carter, and for 5 long years he had searched these sands for a tomb that everyone else believed did not exist. His patron, Lord Carnarvon, a wealthy English nobleman, had begun to lose faith. The valley had been combed over by dozens of expeditions, every corner dug, every crack examined. Carter's team had found nothing but fragments, broken pottery, discarded tools, and the faint remains of old workmen's huts. The desert, it seemed, had swallowed the past whole.
And yet Carter refused to give up. Something in him, some quiet voice that spoke only to those who listened to history, told him that the valley still had one secret left. He had studied old maps, compared ancient records, traced the paths of older tombs. Again and again, one small area called to him, a patch of ground near the tomb of Ramses VI, long ignored because it lay beneath the debris of earlier digs. In early November, his workers began to clear the rubble. The air was dry, the heat merciless. The sound of picks and shovels echoed through the valley. And then a cry. A worker's tool struck something solid. It was the top of a step. Carter ordered the area cleared. More steps appeared, descending into the earth, carved long ago by hands that believed they were building a passage to eternity. As they dug deeper, the air grew cooler. Dust filled their lungs, but they did not stop. Finally, they reached a sealed doorway. Plastered, stamped with royal seals still unbroken. The cartouche bore a name that had not been spoken for over 3,000 years. Tutankhamun. Carter's heart pounded. He sent word to Lord Carnarvon at once. At last have made wonderful discovery in valley, a magnificent tomb with seals intact. Weeks later, on the afternoon of November 26, 1922, the two men stood side by side before the sealed door. Carter's hand trembled as he took a chisel and made a small hole near the top. He inserted a candle into the gap, the flame flickering against the cold air that rushed from within, air that had been trapped since the days of the pharaohs. "What can you see?" Carnarvon asked. Carter leaned closer, his eyes straining through the darkness. Then he whispered the words that would echo through history. "Yes, wonderful things. Gold, everywhere gold. Chariots gilded and shining, statues of gods, thrones, jewelry, chests overflowing with treasure, and beyond them all, another sealed doorway. It was the greatest discovery the world had ever known." When they finally opened the inner chamber, the light of modern lamps fell upon a sight no mortal had seen in over 30 centuries. The boy king Tutankhamun lay within, surrounded by the symbols of his divine status, the crook and flail upon his chest, the mask of gold upon his face. Even in death, his beauty had not faded. He looked serene, eternal, untouched by time. The news spread like fire through the world. Egypt, once forgotten, was reborn in the imagination of millions. Newspapers called it the miracle of the sands. Scholars wept. Tourists flooded Cairo. For the first time in modern history, an ancient king became a celebrity.
Perhaps that was the god's final gift. Even now, when visitors stand before his golden mask in the Cairo Museum, they fall silent. His eyes, inlaid with obsidian and quartz, seem to meet theirs, not as a relic of the past, but as a soul that has never left. In those eyes burns the eternal fire of Egypt, the same fire that lit the temples of Thebes and the hearts of his people. Time tried to bury him.
Sand tried to silence him, but Tutankhamun's story proved that memory itself can be divine. For though he was born a boy, he died a king and awoke as a legend. The Boy Who Defied Time. The tomb was sealed again, but not with stone. This time it was sealed with glass and light, a shrine not of faith, but of history. The modern world stood at its edge, peering through the window of eternity into the golden heart of Egypt. In the years that followed, Tutankhamun's name echoed in every language. He crossed oceans not as a conqueror, but as a symbol. His treasures toured the world, shimmering under museum lights in London, Paris, New York, Tokyo, each piece a fragment of a dream that refused to die. Millions came to see him. They queued for hours just to stand before the mask, to look into those still, eternal eyes. The air around it was thick, not with dust, but with reverence. People whispered, as if afraid to disturb something sacred. Some wept, others smiled, sensing not death, but an ancient promise that beauty endures beyond the reach of decay. And in every gaze, Tutankhamun lived again. Historians debated his life. Scientists studied his DNA, scanning his bones to uncover secrets lost to the centuries. They discovered a boy who had suffered, his bones fragile, his body riddled with pain. He limped, perhaps dragged one leg when he walked. The king of the mightiest land on earth, yet a child of flesh and frailty. He had malaria. His heart had been removed before burial, a rare deviation from custom. The truth whispered of imperfection, of humanity. He was not a god who walked among men. He was a boy who had tried to be one. And maybe that is why his story survived, because it was human, because beneath the gold and ritual there was a heartbeat, faint but enduring.
The scientists reconstructed his face, not the golden mask, but the true visage beneath. A young man with soft cheeks, deep eyes, and an expression almost shy. They printed it in clay, in color, in computer renderings. For a moment, he lived again. The world saw not the legend, but the boy who once looked upon the Nile and dreamed. He became a mirror, showing humanity's its oldest longing, to be remembered. For all our cities, our empires, our machines, we still crave what the ancients sought, to leave something behind that time cannot erase. Tutankhamun did, not by will, not by conquest, but by chance and silence. He was forgotten, and in that forgetting, he was preserved. The sands that buried his name also protected it. Perhaps there is a lesson in that obscurity can sometimes be a kind of immortality. Beneath the glass case, the boy king sleeps again. His golden face reflects the faces of those who gaze upon him, and in that reflection lies a bond, across centuries, across languages, across death itself. He does not speak, but his silence tells 1,000 stories. It speaks of a civilization that once believed the soul was eternal. It speaks of artisans who labored by torchlight, carving eternity into stone. It speaks of priests who whispered prayers for a boy who was too young to be a king, yet too sacred to be forgotten. And above all, it speaks of time itself,
how it buries, how it reveals, how it bends around those who are meant to last. As the years move forward, the sands shift once more. Egypt has changed. Its cities hum with cars instead of chariots. Its temples stand beside towers of steel. But the valley remains, watching, patient. Beneath it, 1,000 kings still sleep, waiting for their names to be spoken again. The stars that once guided Tutankhamun across the sky still shine over the Nile. The moon still turns the desert silver. And somewhere, in the quiet between the dunes, the gods whisper the name of the boy who became immortal. Tutankhamun, not for his power, not for his reign, but for his endurance. He is the child of time itself, a reminder that what is lost may yet be found, and what is found can never truly be lost again. The archaeologists have long gone. The torches have dimmed. The desert has reclaimed its stillness. Yet when the night wind moves through the Valley of the Kings, it carries a faint sound, the echo of chisel on stone, of footsteps descending into the dark, of a candle's first flicker after 3,000 years.
And with it, a whisper. I was Tutankhamun. I was a boy. I was a king. And though the gods have taken my breath, the world will never take my name. The wind fades, the stars watch in silence. The story of Tutankhamun, Egypt's child of destiny, the boy who defied death, continues, carried by every voice that speaks his name, by every dreamer who looks upon his mask and feels, for a moment, the weight of eternity. The sand may bury kingdoms, the years may erase empires, but the heart of a legend never dies. And so, through all the ages to come, the boy king remains, golden, eternal, forever watching beneath the desert sun. The Pharaoh's afterglow. Night falls over the Nile once more, as it has for 5,000 years. The river glimmers under the pale moonlight, winding like a serpent of silver through the black desert. Cairo hums in the distance, a city of neon and noise. Yet here, near the Valley of the Kings, silence still reigns. The wind sighs through the reeds. Somewhere a jackal cries. The stars burn with the same ancient light that once guided the priests of Amun, the same that shone on Tutankhamun's coronation night. In the museum far away, the golden mask rests under perfect, sterile light. Around it, glass and steel. Behind it, the hum of air conditioners. But to those who stand before it, time dissolves. The air thickens with awe. You can almost hear the whisper of incense, the chant of priests, the rattle of sistrums echoing through the halls of Karnak.
And in that moment, Tutankhamun is not dead. He is here, his gaze steady, unblinking, patient. He has become more than a king. He is a threshold between the world of flesh and the world of eternity, between the old gods and the new, between the silence of the grave and the voice of history. Every civilization leaves a single heartbeat behind, one pulse that carries through the centuries. For Egypt, that heartbeat is his. He ruled for barely a decade, yet his afterlife has lasted for millennia.
He was crowned in the shadow of chaos and buried in the embrace of mystery. Yet he rose again, in a century that worshipped machines instead of gods. He was forgotten by kings, remembered by dust, and then found by dreamers. In every era, he is reborn. To the scholars of the West, he is a puzzle to be solved. To the poets of the East, he is the soul of Egypt itself, young, luminous, divine. To those who dream of immortality, he is proof that memory is stronger than death. And perhaps to the gods themselves, he is their favorite irony, the frailest Pharaoh becoming the most eternal of all. There are those who say that when the tomb was opened, something invisible escaped, not a curse, but a presence, a spirit not of vengeance, but of remembrance, a ripple that spread across the world, awakening a lost reverence for the ancient, the sacred, the beautiful. Because Tutankhamun's story is not one of wealth or gold or grandeur, it is the story of rediscovery, of the world remembering its roots. Before the modern age of noise and progress, before skyscrapers and steel, there were men who believed that to die was to travel, that the heart could weigh less than a feather, that names had power beyond death. And when Carter's candle first flickered inside the tomb, that ancient belief flared back to life. Humanity looked upon the boy king, and for a heartbeat remembered its soul.
Each piece whispered, "We believed in forever." And perhaps that is why his tomb remained intact. Not through luck, but through destiny. Because the world needed, after centuries of wars and forgetfulness, to be reminded of something sacred. Now, when the light falls across his face, when the camera flashes, when 1,000 eyes meet his across the glass, Tutankhamun fulfills that purpose. He is not just Egypt's king, he is humanity's memory. The museum grows quiet at closing hour. The last visitors drift away. The guards dim the lights. In the darkness, the mask gleams faintly, as if alive, the reflection of eternity on a human face. The boy who died 3,000 years ago still commands a kingdom, not of sand, but of souls. He reigns in the imagination of millions. He rules the dreams of artists and historians. He speaks in silence, and his language is timeless. And when dawn rises over the Nile again, his story continues, not in the pages of books, but in the hearts of all who have seen his eyes and felt the pull of something older than time. Because Tutankhamun's true kingdom was never of Egypt. It was, and is, the kingdom of remembrance. The pharaohs built their tombs to last forever. Only one succeeded. The eternal legacy. Morning breaks over the desert, pale and gold, the kind of light that seems older than the world. The first rays sweep over the Valley of the Kings, tracing the rugged ridges and falling at last upon the doorway once sealed in silence, the tomb of Tutankhamun. The air is still. The sand lies undisturbed. But in that stillness, something eternal stirs. The tomb no longer belongs to Egypt alone. It belongs to humanity. It has become a mirror, showing us our longing, our fear, our desire to be more than mortal dust. The story of the boy king is not a tale of wealth or mystery.
It is the oldest story of all, the story of remembrance.
For as long as his name is spoken, Tutankhamun still reigns. The gods of Egypt, once feared and worshipped, have faded into myth. The temples crumble, the hieroglyphs erode. Yet his face, that golden mask, calm and unbroken, endures. It has become an emblem of time itself, beautiful, untouchable, and endlessly watching. Every generation rediscovers him anew. To the Victorians, he was a relic of lost splendor. To the archaeologists of the 20th century, he was proof that history could breathe again. To the dreamers of today, he is the child of immortality, proof that beauty and mystery never truly die. And in this endless rediscovery lies the power of his name. Because Tutankhamun's greatest gift was not gold or glory. It was the reminder that the past is never truly gone. It waits, buried beneath our own forgetfulness, until someone dares to dig deep enough to find it. There is a quiet truth hidden beneath the myths and masks. The young king did not choose immortality. It was given to him by time, by chance, and by the relentless curiosity of the living. Perhaps that is why his spirit feels so close, not like a god's, cold and distant, but like a child's, fragile and luminous. He lived a life too brief to know greatness, yet his death gave birth to eternity. The ancient Egyptians believed that to speak the name of the dead was to make them live again. If that is true, then Tutankhamun has lived longer than any soul on earth. He has lived in the whispers of explorers, in the gasps of visitors, in the ink of 1,000 pens. He has lived in the eyes of those who stand before his mask and feel for an instant the pulse of something divine. He has lived in the songs of sandstorms, in the soft hiss of desert wind that still passes over his resting place each night. He has lived because we remember. And so, the boy king who once walked beneath the pillars of Luxor and dreamed of gods and glory has transcended his own kingdom. His empire is no longer measured in lands or monuments, but in the hearts of those who have felt his story. Even now, deep within the museum halls, as tourists leave and the night returns, the air grows still. The light fades, yet one final glow remains, the faint reflection on gold, like a heartbeat beneath glass. It is not a trick of light. It is remembrance. Because Tutankhamun never truly died in the desert. He sleeps in the memory of the world. He speaks in silence. He rules in eternity.
And somewhere beyond the veil of time, beyond the reach of sand, stone, and empire, a young king still walks beneath the eternal sun, his crown gleaming, his name unbroken. He turns toward the horizon, toward forever. And as he walks, the gods rise with him, their shadows long, their faces bright. The Nile flows once more, the temples sing again. The stars gather above as they did on the night he was crowned. And from the depths of the ages, his voice whispers, "I was Tutankhamun. I ruled for a moment, but I lived for eternity. Remember me, and I am never gone." The wind moves softly across the valley, carrying his name once more, across the sands, across the centuries, across the endless night of time. Tutankhamun, the boy who became a legend, the king who defied time,
the child who became eternity. And thus his story ends, not in death, but in forever. The whisper of forever. The valley sleeps again. The wind, gentle and ancient, weaves through the cliffs like a sigh from the gods. The sands that once hid kings now rest undisturbed beneath the wide Egyptian sky. But beneath that quiet, the echo of one name still hums through the stone: Tutankhamun. Night deepens, and the stars sharpen to silver points. In that silence, time folds. The world of now and the world of then blend, and the boy king's spirit stirs once more. He stands again in the halls of his palace, bathed in torchlight. The air smells of lotus and cedar. Servants bow as he passes, their eyes low, their hearts trembling at the sight of divinity made flesh. He walks with the measured grace of one who knows the weight of crowns. Yet within him he is still a boy, curious, uncertain, searching. Outside, the Nile blows with moonlight. Its waters murmur softly, the same sound it made when his ancestors first called upon the gods. The river is eternity itself, moving yet unchanged, alive yet ancient. He looks to the stars, those same stars that his priests said were the eyes of the gods. He wonders if they truly watch, or if even gods grow silent with time. He wonders if his name will outlive his breath. Far in the future, his wonder will be answered. The sands will shift, the empire will fade, the temples will fall to ruin, their pillars half swallowed by earth. The chants will die on forgotten tongues, and still his tomb will sleep, untouched, waiting for the day when hands from another age will find him again, when Carter's candle will flicker, when the dust of 30 centuries will dance in the beam of new light, when the silence will finally speak. For this was not accident. It was destiny. The gods perhaps had chosen him not for the world of his time, but for ours. They had hidden him from his own age so he could awaken in another, so he could remind us that time may bury memory, but it cannot bury meaning. And so, across the centuries, Tutankhamun's journey continues, not from palace to tomb, but from life to legacy, from oblivion to wonder.
Every artifact from his tomb tells a piece of that journey. The golden mask, radiant with eternal youth, the face of perfection that even death could not mar. The chariot, its wheels gilded with sunlight, its reins still smelling faintly of leather and dust. The dagger forged from a meteor, a gift from the heavens themselves, a reminder that kings once wielded the stars. The miniature boats carved to carry his soul across the cosmic river, and the letters of devotion buried with him, words written in ink long turned to dust, still murmuring love from across eternity. All of it, all of him, endures, a song written in gold, sung in silence. And when we look upon him now, we do not see a corpse, we see a reflection of our longing to matter, our hunger to last, our refusal to fade. Tutankhamun's immortality is not his own, it is ours, because in remembering him, we remember the part of ourselves that belongs to forever. The night grows colder, the desert shivers under the moon. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the Nile glistens like a serpent of glass. The wind carries with it a voice, faint, ancient, almost kind. All kings fall, all thrones crumble, but the heart remembers. And as long as one voice speaks my name, I am never gone. The whisper fades into the dark,
carried on the wings of sand. And as dawn approaches, the valley glows once more, bathed in the same gold that once covered a young king's face. Tutankhamun, boy, king, legend, and memory, has crossed beyond death into the quiet, endless light of forever. His story ends where it began, beneath the same eternal sky, under the same timeless stars, with his name written not in stone, but in the breath of the living. Tutankhamun, the boy who became a god, the king who became a story, the story that became eternity.